Allen Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has taken a step toward improving broker problems in the trucking industry. But is it enough? I'll discuss that, plus what an advisory committee on underwrite protections discussed with OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, Jay Grimes. Many questions surrounding how out-of-state drivers will operate in California if AB 5 is enforced were raised by a judge during a recent hearing. We spoke with OOIDA's Government Affairs Council to find out where we're at with AB 5. And finally, a legislative panel in Wyoming has backed away from a possible diesel tax increase. Meanwhile, Wisconsin is working to create a commercial driver training grant program. Scott Thompson covers both with our state legislative expert, Keith Goebel. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. We begin with our weekly look at diesel prices, spurred by the Energy Information Administration's weekly report. And once again, they're on the decline. Last week's national average fell another 8.5 cents compared to the week before, settling in at $4.20 a gallon. Over the past 4 weeks, the average price has dipped more than 33 cents. All 10 regions saw prices decline last week, led by the Midwest, where the average shed more than 10 cents. It's more of the same this week, according to the latest data from ProMiles.com. They had Tuesday morning's national average at $4.25, down 7 cents compared to a week prior. As with the EIA report, every region in the ProMiles survey recorded price declines week over week. Load-to-truck ratios increased slightly last week across all three equipment types. Robert Rouse with DAT says they saw a 4.2% increase in load volume, which was a slight bump in freight.
During the week of Thanksgiving, we typically see less freight volume as a lot of shippers are taking some extended time off, usually about a 4-day weekend. So we expect this week to be pretty light. So momentary bump back down and then hopefully a bump back up after that. When we look at the number of trucks on the DAT load board, they decreased by about 7.9%, down to 390,000 trucks last week. That's exactly what we'd probably expect at this time of year. When we look at the overall strength of the spot market last week, we saw load-to-truck ratios increase slightly across all three equipment types. Even though we had less loads than normal this time of year, we saw the volume of trucks drop even more, creating a stronger ratio. When we look at this week's reefer load-to-truck ratio, load post volume actually increased by about 5% week over week, and that was boosted by Christmas trees and food shipments ahead of Thanksgiving. Nonetheless, reefer load post and the spot market volume were around 37% lower than last year and about 45% lower than the pre-pandemic average for week 46.
Rouse says national benchmark broker-to-carrier spot rates without fuel increased again for reefers, while vans stayed flat for the third straight week. The driverless car division at General Motors is down 2 executives. On Sunday, Cruise CEO Kyle Voigt resigned. Then 1 day later, the company's co-founder and chief product officer Daniel Kim followed him out the door. It's the latest in a series of setbacks for Cruise, which last month lost its approval to operate robo-taxi services in San Francisco following a crash involving a pedestrian, one of several traffic incidents in recent months. Cruise has since suspended all operations. Meanwhile, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg promised oversight of companies like Cruise and autonomous vehicles in general. Secretary Buttigieg told reporters that the DOT would do everything it can with the authority they do have to ensure that driverless vehicles are deployed safely. Some of that is already being done with Cruise. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has an open investigation into whether the company has been taking sufficient precautions to safeguard pedestrians. However, 24 unions, including the International Brotherhood of Teamsters and United Auto Workers, this month called on Secretary Buttigieg and regulators to do more. They want an industry-wide investigation. Be vigilant this holiday weekend. CargoNet says the threat of cargo theft will be elevated over the coming days. The company has noted a sharp increase in theft reports in recent months. Incidents are up to an average of 51 per week over the last year. That's a 64% increase compared to the decade before. In fact, numbers are up across the board, and holiday weekends are notoriously busy for criminals. Danny Ramon, who heads up the intelligence and response team at Overhaul, says truckers need to be more vigilant than ever these days.
Around the holidays, risk absolutely spikes. The folks who perform cargo theft, whether they're the professionals who wake up every day strictly to perform cargo theft and will travel multiple states to do it, or if they're the new breed of cargo criminal that have popped up since the pandemic, which are more local to the area. They're probably already involved in criminal activity in their local area anyways. And they've seen, mainstream media news that there's ripe pickings, there's profits to be had by pilfering trailers and rail containers. So some of the specific areas that drivers are going to want to avoid with long holiday weekends coming up is staging or parking near the destination. Criminals know, where the especially big box distribution centers and receiving facilities, criminals know that a lot of these places have long lines and are typically operating behind schedule. And that's going to be even more so during the holidays. And so they know that there's going to be a lot of ripe targets waiting near those distribution centers, usually outside of the fences. Because they either missed their appointment or the facility is running behind and they just don't have the capacity to take them in. We always caution against staging outside of a delivery facility.
Also on the rise, misdirection attacks in which thieves use stolen carrier and broker identities to obtain freight, misdirect it, and steal it. And that's amplified this time of year when logistics brokers are often under added pressure and therefore more likely to make mistakes. Capacity won't be an issue for FedEx, UPS, and the U.S. Postal Service this holiday season, as it has been in recent years past. The Associated Press reports that the carriers all say they should be able to keep up with demand this year. The AP-quoted Ship Matrix is saying that the parcel industry has a capacity to deliver more than 110 million parcels per day, more than the projected holiday peak of 82 million per day. To make that happen, UPS is in the process of hiring 100,000 seasonal workers. FedEx also hiring. So too is the U.S. Postal Service. New lanes for commercial traffic are being added to a border crossing in California. Officials held a ribbon-cutting ceremony last week at the Cal Execo East Land Port of Entry in California. The first phase of the project, now complete, added 2 new northbound truck lanes. Future phases will add more, along with additional passenger vehicle lanes and pedestrian crossings, along with other improvements. The project is scheduled for completion this spring. More than 450,000 commercial trucks cross back and forth across the U.S.-Mexico border at the Cal Execo Port of Entry each and every year. Several dozen trucks and drivers were placed out of service last week during a CMV blitz in Savannah, Georgia. The Georgia Department of Public Safety says officers focused their efforts on Interstate 16 and 95 and near the Port of Savannah. A total of 328 inspections were conducted. 52 vehicles were placed out of service, along with 24 drivers for critical violations. And finally, a nonprofit in Texas is getting $20,000 for free driver education courses. The Trucking Cares Foundation is making the donation. The South Dallas Driving Academy, which provides driving courses for low-income teens and young adults, is the recipient. Their program launched in 2021 with seed money that came from the Trucking Cares Foundation. In addition to helping people obtain driver's licenses, the South Dallas Driving Academy also helps adults obtain CDLs and connects them with trucking companies looking to hire. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Next, I'll discuss FMCSA's new broker bond requirements with OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, Jay Grimes. Ashley Blackford covers the latest on California's AB5 with OOIDA Government Affairs Counsel Paul Torlina. And Scott Thompson talks diesel taxes in Wyoming with our state legislative expert, Keith Goebel. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Today's rising costs affect everyone. Replace your harmonic damper with a genuine Vibratech TVD viscous damper to prevent costly repairs and downtime. Keep your money in your pocket and your truck on the road with Vibratech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
Firestone tires are for more of everything. More miles for every tire dollar and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has taken a step toward improving broker problems in the trucking industry. But is it enough? Welcome back to Landline Now. I'm your host, Mark Rettig, and this is Regulatory Roundup. I'm joined, as always, by OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, Jay Grimes. Jay, how you doing?
Doing well, Mark. Good to be with you.
Good to have you here. So the FMCSA issued a final rule on November 16th involving brokers. What specifically did this rule do?
Yeah, this is a rule that will change the financial responsibility requirements for broker and freight forwarders. And really, it all relates to some legislative provisions that were enacted back in 2012 that raised that broker bond up to $75,000 and also had a few other requirements that FMCSA giving them enforcement authority and the ability to suspend a broker's authority when that bond falls below that minimum level. In the decade plus since those provisions were initially acted, we have not seen FMCSA really take action until this rulemaking process. And the central issue here is motor carriers and drivers not getting payment on claims they file with brokers and other financial entities. These entities will let the claims accrue against that $75,000 level. And then when it comes time to pay out, motor carriers are only getting a fraction of what they're owed in pennies on the dollar. And sometimes it takes a long, drawn-out legal process to even get there. So rulemaking we were supportive of and hopeful that it's going to, be able to crack down on this one aspect of broker fraud. But I think, we're kind of going to have to wait and see exactly how it is implemented, how it's enforced, and if there's enough teeth in this final rulemaking.
There's kind of four major points that are part of this. I'm wondering if you can go over the four different points here in terms of how it's going to apply to this broker situation.
Right. So kind of the main aspect of the rulemaking is a provision called immediate suspension of the broker and freight forwarding operating authority. And, generally the process today, again, too drawn out, not enough claims going back into the motor carrier's hands. And this sort of creates a process that's going to hold brokers and financial entities more responsible. And some of the conditions include when a broker or freight forwarder consents to a drawdown, a broker or freight forwarder does not respond to a valid notice of claim from a surety or trust provider, or a claim against the broker or freight forwarder is converted to a judgment. And then when that happens, if the broker or freight forwarder does not replenish their funds within a 7 calendar day notice from FMCSA, then the FMCSA can then take action to shut down that entity with a notification of suspension of operating authority. So sort of the final rule does kind of set out and establish a process for FMCSA having more oversight, having more enforcement authority over some of these brokers who are not paying out claims in a timely manner. Now, a lot of this isn't going to become official until January 2025, and then a couple of provisions not until January 2026. FMCSA is also saying it's going to use its forthcoming unified registration system platform to receive the financial information from surety providers, trustees, brokers, and freight forwarders to administer the immediate suspension responsibilities. So kind of to be determined on exactly how that is going to get operational and how that will work through the the pending Unified Registration System platform.
I know that OOIDA has looked this over. Based on their assessment of this, does it look like this is going to do enough, or is this just a good step?
I think it's more in the good step category, where it establishes some processes that are needed, but it's not, really going into full effect of any time that $75,000 bond dips below that level that FMCSA can step in and suspend authority. So I think kind of see there might be still some loopholes that brokers and other entities can kind of use to draw out this process. And it's really just going to depend on how proactive FMCSA and DOT are in enforcing some of these new rules. If they're going to really make examples out of some of the brokers that are not paying out claims, then there could be enough here to really get those actors out of the industry. They're kind of, going to let the legal process still play out, let some of these time windows play out. I'm not sure we're going to have the intended results of the final rule.
The rule from FMCSA was published way ahead of when it was expected. Does that indicate a level of enthusiasm on the agency's part for dealing with the problems the rule is meant to address?
I'm hopeful, and that's certainly kind of looking at it in an optimistic fashion. I think in the last regulatory update, we were not expecting this rulemaking to be published until early next year. I think February 2024 was the estimated date. So I think it is a good sign that they're getting this out now. Now we have these January 2025 and January 2026 compliance dates. So on one hand, that's good, especially when we're looking at kind of the separate issue here in terms of broader broker transparency. And we're still waiting on the announcement and publication of a separate broker transparency proposal that was announced in March in response to a petition that OOIDA filed back in 2020. And FMCSA still has not put that out. We heard a few months ago that it was going to be October of 2024. So if they're moving this one up, maybe they're have hopes of getting out that broker transparency rulemaking sooner than expected too.
Is it unusual for the agency to take this long to respond to a petition like that?
Yes and no. Sometimes, as we saw with the hours of service rulemaking from a few years ago, I think we filed a petition in 2018 or 2017, 2018, and we had a final rule, and a couple of years later. It's already been 3 years since we filed the broker transparency petition. We know in that time that broker fraud continues to escalate, really, in terms of just incredibly high economic damage to the trucking industry. So kind of given the urgency, I thought we would have seen something out certainly by now. It was a little disappointing a few weeks ago when we saw that official update and the publication date wouldn't be until October of 2024. Now that we have this broker bond and financial responsibility rulemaking kind of taken care of, and that final rule being published, hopefully we can get to the broker transparency proposal too, because once that comes out, it's still going to be at least another year or two before any final rule is likely to come out of that one too.
Okay. Let's move on to another topic here. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's Advisory Committee on Underwrite Protections met recently. That's a mouthful. And while they agree on some things, on others they remain divided. Let's kind of start broadly here, Jay. Just for folks that aren't aware of this, what is this committee and how did it come about?
Yeah, so this committee was required in the 2021 highway bill. Basically an advisory committee of industry representatives to provide recommendations to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration as well as the Secretary of Transportation on regulations and safety rules related to underride crashes and fatalities from underride crashes. So the committee was formed earlier this year. They had their first meeting in May, and last week they conducted their second meeting.
Who is on this committee? Because I think that's kind of interesting as well.
Yeah, it's a diverse group. You've got congressionally required kind of representatives. So you've got representatives from motor carriers and drivers, from crash victims, law enforcement personnel, emergency responders. You've got equipment manufacturers as well. So I think all in all, there's 16 members on the panel. Some of them very familiar with in kind of this long-standing debate on underride equipment. And so you got folks from drivers who maybe have some concerns about the equipment, and then some advocates who have been supportive of underride mandates. So really opportunity for discussion and deliberation as they make their recommendations to NHTSA moving forward.
I mentioned at the start that they agree on some things, on others they remain divided. So let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, what do they have consensus on at this point?
I think consensus is finding a way to improve highway safety, reduce crashes overall, and the charge of the committee is to make safety recommendations specifically related to underrides. And I think there's some members of the group that think a mandate is the best way. And other folks in the committee think, well, we've got to take a more kind of bigger picture look at whether it's overall driver training, looking at perhaps other technologies that could assist drivers, and really also got to take in some of the costs of the equipment too, and how that would impact safety, impact the number of trucks on the road. So there's a whole host of different issues related to this back and forth discussion, and certainly it's not a new issue that folks in the trucking industry are dealing with here. There's been lots of research done by NHTSA going back decades. There have been different legislative proposals, and just recently we had an advance notice of proposed rulemaking that NHTSA put out earlier this year, detailing their latest research and also asking for more feedback and public comment from all those involved, as NHTSA kind of is at a point from the last highway bill that they've got to kind of make a decision whether a rulemaking process is necessary for this equipment.
On those opposing underride guards on the committee, I'm curious, what are some of the points that they brought up during this meeting?
Yeah, a lot of it has to deal with operational concerns on different types of commercial motor vehicle equipment. If you've got a mandated side underride, is that going to make it more difficult for you to get in and out of loading docks and hard to navigate areas? Is it going to have the necessary clearance to get over railroad tracks and uneven infrastructure? So that's what we heard from the industry representatives. We also, did hear about the cost of the equipment, the weight of the equipment. Is that going to displace a lot of the weight and cargo that motor carriers are currently allowed to transport? And then, are you going to have more trucks on the road? And what are the safety impacts of that going to be? So it's a very complicated issue dealing with a whole lot of highway safety impacts, a whole lot of economic, and a whole lot of operational issues when you talk about proposing mandates for underrides.
You mentioned cost a little bit ago there, and of course, there is a cost-benefit analysis that's out. What does that say?
Yeah, the latest NHTSA research that was required by the 2021 highway bill, which NHTSA has done in the past couple of years, still says that a side underride mandate would be 6 to 8 times more expensive than the safety benefits. So the costs outweighing safety benefits by 6 to 8 times. That cost-benefit analysis, did not even include a lot of the operational impacts to be considered as well. And the committee, I think, does have some questions for NHTSA about how that cost-benefit analysis was conducted.
Okay, well, we've run out of time, Jay, but thank you very much for all the information.
Okay.
I've been talking with OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs, Jay Grimes, and folks, you can learn more about this at landline.media. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now, welcome back. Paul Torlina joins me now. He is Government Affairs Advocacy Counsel at OOIDA. Paul, thank you for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Today we are talking about AB 5, and for those listening who have likely heard the term but aren't entirely sure, can you explain what AB 5 is?
Sure, I will do my best. It's a simple concept, but at the same time it gets complex the more you talk about it. So starting from the very top and the very basic, AB 5 stands for Assembly Bill 5, Assembly Bill number 5 out of the state of California. And what AB 5's intended purpose is that it is simply a bill to classify employees in the state of California and do so by being subject to a test that either says you're an employee or you're an independent contractor when you're operating in the state of California.
So what is kind of the latest legal challenge in all of this?
So the latest legal challenge is that AB 5 functions to essentially eliminate independent contractor owner-operators. And part of the struggle in the litigation of this case is understanding the difference between an employee, an independent owner-operator, and a motor carrier. Many people don't understand that when they talk about AB 5. Many people don't understand that the effect of AB 5 on the independent contractor owner-operator is that they evaporate if the law is upheld. You have to make a choice between either becoming a motor carrier and getting your own authority or going to work for a motor carrier as an employee. That's what the rub is here, and that's what the argument is about from CTA, the California Trucking Association, as the plaintiff, and OOIDA as an intervener in the case on the same side as CTA as a plaintiff.
And if it comes to that, I mean, is it safe to say a lot of owner-operators are just not going to run in California? They're just going to refuse to go there?
The information we've gotten from our members so far is that the majority, if not a super majority of them, have just started to refuse loads in California for that very reason. And that's a big argument that OOIDA set forth at the trial for the AB 5 in Southern California. I was fortunate enough to be there as an observer, not as an attorney making arguments, but that is a central argument, is that the Dormant Commerce Clause to the U.S. Constitution is designed to prevent that effect when a state makes a law that affects interstate commerce. So what the Dormant Commerce Clause does is say, well, we want to protect people coming from out of state from a law that governs interstate commerce. And if that law creates an effect where people are going to just not come into the state, that's a problem.
So is AB 5 in full effect right now in California?
It is in effect. And that's a complicated question because part of the reason we were having a trial on Monday was that the lawsuit that has been filed is seeking an injunction of the law. And what that means is if the judge grants the injunction, the law is suspended from being in effect and being enforced. At this current time, the law is in effect, but it's not being enforced. And that's sort of a key part to the arguments in the case, is that the state of California has never issued any guidance on how they're going to enforce AB 5. And they've been asked several times for clarifications, opinion letters, guidance letters, whatever it might be. They've refused to issue anything. And also at the hearing on Monday, the Judge Benitez, who's hearing the case, specifically asked them, what do you tell a trucker who's coming into the state when he hits the state line? What's going to happen to him? Is he going to go to jail? Is he going to get a fine? Is he going to get in trouble and get impounded? What's going to happen? They still can't answer that. They still don't know what the enforcement mechanisms will be or how they will be administered, and that's a major problem.
What are the arguments, at the hearing when it comes to, I want to ask you about the California Trucking Association and OOIDA. We'll start with CTA. What were their arguments?
Their main argument is that there's a law out there that's referred to as F-Quad or F4A, which is a long abbreviation for a Federal Aviation Administration law that it preempts laws that affect pricing or routes in delivery of goods. That was previously an issue that Judge Benitez ruled on in this case. He, several years ago, granted an injunction against AB5 in this case. Then it was appealed to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, who reversed it, but not on specific grounds saying that F4A across the board always wins to prevent preemption of a law like this. What the Ninth Circuit said was that generally F4A does not apply to a case like this. However, the Ninth Circuit sent the case back to the trial court, back to Judge Benitez again, and that's when OOIDA intervened. At the same time, CTA came up with a little more nuanced argument based on the actual facts of this case to re-argue F4A in a more nuanced way and tell the judge, look, the Ninth Circuit reversed this, but not on these particular grounds in this particular case. So it's still an argument that's valid and alive. So that's their main thrust of their argument is the F4A preemption. Setting them aside, OOIDA's main arguments are constitutional. They're based on the Commerce Clause and the Dormant Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution, and then the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution and the California Constitution. So to summarize those arguments, we talked earlier about the Dormant Commerce Clause issue, but really when you're talking about the Commerce Clause and equal protection, what you're really looking at is you have to balance out what are the burdens to interstate commerce and people who are involved in it when this law takes effect. You balance that out with what are the benefits to the state that made the law. If the burdens are not significant, or if the benefits are great, the law will be upheld. That's typically what the law says in situations like this. So OOIDA's main arguments here are the burdens to independent owner-operators are significant. You have to choose to either give up your business, sell your equipment, potentially take a loss on your capital investment, whatever it might be, to become an employee. Then you're faced with potentially making less money, absolutely having no control over your business anymore, your routes, your decision-making as a truck driver, whatever it might be. All the things that you enjoyed as an independent owner-operator, poof, they're gone. Good luck with that. So that's argument number one as far as the significant burdens go. There's also a dollar cost that goes with that the court heard evidence on, and it's in the trial briefs for the case. So that's something the judge will also consider. The main benefit that the state has argued is that they're protecting people by giving them employee rights. Other than to say things like fringe benefits or protections from wage and hour violations, they haven't really given a great benefit argument, so to speak. What they've chosen to do is talk about how the burdens really aren't that great. So their arguments against OOIDA's significant burden arguments are to say, well, it's really not that bad. And by the way, you get to be an employee. Isn't that great? So that's where the rub is here, is the judge has to decide not only are the quantifiable dollar costs that have been laid out for him in converting from an owner-operator to an employee, are those high? Are those significant? But also, what does it really mean to essentially lose your business the minute you go a tenth of a mile into the state of California in your rig? Because, like I said earlier, you hit the state line, your business evaporates. You have to either become an employee or go become a motor carrier. And so there were also arguments made as to the significance of becoming a motor carrier versus being an owner-operator, the additional responsibility and the risk that comes with that. While it may not seem like a huge difference to someone who doesn't know trucking that well, many people in the trucking industry understand there's a huge difference between the two, especially that business risk. You have to go out and get your own clients now. You have to be responsible for all of your own insurance and overhead and just business risk that maybe you don't have to handle as an owner-operator. Not to mention the fact that maybe your skill as a truck driver just meshes really nicely with being an owner-operator.
Mm-hmm.
But when you talk about being a carrier and a truck driver at the same time, operating under your own authority, maybe you're not quite as good as you were at handling being an owner-operator and a driver. That's a much different balance to be striking when you're driving a truck and being a motor carrier at the same time. So those are the main arguments that were made by OOIDA, and they're much more nuanced when you compare them to CTA's F4A preemption argument. The equal protection one is a little bit more interesting because it's not necessarily a burden versus benefit so much as it is you're looking and saying you're treating interstate truck drivers much differently than California intrastate truck drivers. And part of that argument is that AB5 actually has an exemption in it that says, it's called the B2B exemption, the business-to-business exemption, and it says that if you're operating in a certain manner, providing services in the state, you're exempt from AB5. Well, that's all great except for the people who are interstate truck drivers who are leased on with someone because of the truth in leasing requirements. They say that you have to have a certain amount of control that is, let me summarize this, and I'm trying to make sure I say this right for everybody listening. Under the B2B exemption, in order to qualify for it, you have to be free from the control and direction of anybody that you're operating for in order to qualify for that exemption. If you're subject to a lease agreement, let's say you're an owner-operator leasing on with a motor carrier, the truth in leasing requirements under the federal regulations specifically say that you are agreeing that you have exclusive possession, control, and use of the equipment. Those two things are completely opposite of one another. So it is legally impossible to comply with the truth in leasing regulations under federal law and qualify for the B2B exemption at the same time. There's your equal protection violation. That doesn't affect intrastate people in any way because they're not subject to the truth in leasing requirements. That's only for interstate truckers.
So where are we at right now?
Right now, we are waiting on Judge Benitez to say, I'm going to grant the injunction and suspend AB5 one more time. And he previously did that. So people are asking me for predictions since I was in the room that day, and I'm not equipped to give one because I don't want to speak for Judge Benitez, but we do have a history of him granting this injunction on this particular law once before. As far as a timeline goes, I would tell you in most situations in a case like this, just from my experience, I was a litigator and trial attorney for almost 20 years. I would expect 5 to 6 months for a decision on this. In this particular case, I think it's going to be 2 to 3 at the most, and it wouldn't shock me. Today's November, 17th? Wouldn't shock me if we have a decision by the end of 2023. However, one prediction I am willing to make is that whoever loses is going to appeal this to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals again. And I have enough experience with federal Court of Appeals, not necessarily the Ninth Circuit, to know that we're talking 18 to 24 months from the date of appeal before that would get decided by the Ninth Circuit. So the very long answer to your short question on where are we at now, where we're at right now is we're waiting on Judge Benitez, and then it's going to be in 1.5 to 2 years from when we're done waiting on Judge Benitez.
Wow. So this conversation is not over.
Oh, no. Once
and there will be many more, I'm sure.
I'm sure there will. Once Judge Benitez takes his position and issues the court's opinion, it'll be rinse and repeat here, and it'll be a matter of what the Ninth Circuit's going to do with this and what those arguments will look like.
All right. Well, Paul, thank you very much for coming in and talking to me about this.
My pleasure.
That was Paul Torlina talking about AB5. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. Stay tuned for more after this.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
And we're back on Landline Now with just enough time to take a quick trip to a couple states making moves with regard to your livelihoods. It's time for our state legislative update with our state legislative expert, Keith Goebel of Landline Magazine. Keith, how we doing?
Scott, doing all right. How you doing?
Doing just fine here. These next several minutes are brought to you, I guess, by the letter W, because we're going to focus on two W states, Keith, Wyoming and Wisconsin. We'll start with the former Wyoming, where there were plans to increase the diesel tax, but it appears those plans are now on hold. What happened?
With the letter W, do I have to do some sort of voice?
I would love if you did a voice.
I don't know if I can do a voice.
For the next 9 minutes.
I know you can do voices. but yeah, no. Hey, out of Wyoming, in the interim, they're not in a current legislative session there. So they're, at this point of the year, they're just looking into what ideas, specifically we're talking about transportation, so their interim transportation committee is considering possible legislation for next year. And it starts with first discussing whether they want to pursue, in this particular case, do they want to pursue a higher diesel tax or gas tax combined with a diesel tax. Or I think recently we talked about their pursuit of charging electric vehicle owners so that they can, a fee, registration fee, so they can get some more revenue. So really it's the same kind of process with this possible fuel tax increase. And Wyoming, their tax, it's 24 cents for both gas and diesel. It's unchanged here for the past decade now. So they're considering and having discussions there of what they might need to revisit as far as what type of tax increase. Specifically, there are two proposals that they were looking into. One of those included a diesel-only tax increase of 4 cents a gallon. And with that, in an effort to maybe help out Wyoming-based truckers to have a reduction in the vehicle registration fees that truckers pay. Really the focus being on getting money from out-of-state truckers. So that was really the leading pursuit there here in recent months was, again, a focus on out-of-state truckers. There was a second proposal that would have increased both gas and diesel by 2 cents. And in response to that increase, lowering vehicle registration fees for all Wyoming drivers.
So that's what they talked about. But ultimately, they have backed away from that plan. Did they give a reason as to why, or maybe I guess what they're doing next?
Yeah, and the reason why they were looking at this to begin with is, the Wyoming DOT, as they've explained to lawmakers through the years, and to this point, they say that they've got about a $400 million annual shortfall for transportation funding. So trying to eat into that. Not really what was it? I think it was like within the past couple of years, they considered a 15-cent fuel tax increase to help eat into that gap. But obviously, with the focus being on out-of-state truckers, with a 4-cent increase, wasn't really going to get anywhere close to that. What lawmakers were told by officials there in the state, financial people with background with finances, is that it was really going to result in a net a negative effect. They were going to lose money by doing this. It's just they would need to increase the fuel tax rates a lot more than what they had been proposing. But they were actually going to be losing money in an effort to
raise money.
Yeah, in an effort to raise money, but not by too much because they didn't really want to upset their constituents too much. So, I mean, I get, and it makes sense that you try to not hurt financially your Wyoming-based truck drivers, but in an effort to do that with the 4-cent increase to diesel, it just wasn't going to get them. It wasn't going to get them moving in the right direction. And even the proposed 2-cent increase for gas and diesel, they were going to lose. They were still going to lose money. It wasn't going to be as much as they would have lost with that first option, with the focus just being on the diesel tax. But they were still going to come out to be, go in the wrong direction.
And I guess that leads us real quick to where we're headed now. It sounds like they had some plans and they've scrapped those plans. What's the plan now?
The plan is to continue to talk.
Okay.
The chairman of the committee there, he pointed out, this is like the 5th time here in recent years that they've looked to increase fuel taxes, at least in some capacity. All have been thrown out, but the fact that as the state DOT has pointed out, there's hundreds of millions of dollars that they are that they're short every year. Something still needs to be done to address that. So yes, the chairman explained to the committee, while this issue is dead for now, there's most likely going to be reworking, and the most likely that they will be discussing some other proposal whenever they meet for the 2024 budget session.
Let's shift to that other promised W state, Wisconsin. A legislative panel there has been working on easing the CDL training process for those who are interested, and it looks like they've come up with a plan.
Yeah, and this is one that the Wisconsin Senate has approved here in recent days, looking to establish and have in place a commercial driver training grant program. Specifically, this legislation would be for CDL training provider to they have to satisfy entry-level driver training requirements that have been established by FMCSA. There would be a grant limit as far as how much would be available. But yeah, they've got money in their budget that they would access to help cover that program to get folks who are wanting to become truck drivers, making it a little easier for them to afford.
And this is something we've seen happen in other states as well. Wisconsin, it is worth noting, I think, throughout this process in getting this plan in place, has talked about the importance of trucking in that state specifically, obviously important in every state, but it is worth noting again, I think, that policymakers there and lawmakers have taken notice of the importance of getting more qualified drivers into the industry.
Yeah, it was one of the figures that were provided for lawmakers there during discussion of this, and when it was in a Senate committee, was that recent numbers. A year ago, in Wisconsin, over 660 million tons of freight that are moved by all modes of transportation, but 2/3 of that freight is moved specifically via truck. So recognizing that, for those folks who are wanting to be in the industry, again, trying to have that financial aid so that they can help move again is a lot of freight there in the state.
Yes, it is. Our apologies to Washington State and West Virginia. We only got halfway through the W states today, Keith. But if people out there want news from any state that begins with any letter, you can check out Keith's comprehensive work at landline.media. Just click on the news tab at the top of the page and scroll down to news by state. Keith, always a pleasure. We'll see you next time.
Well, thanks for having me.
Our thanks to Keith Coble of Landline Magazine, and our thanks to you, as always, for listening to Landline Now today. We're back tomorrow with another program, and we hope to see you then. Until then, drive safe.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm. I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
Chrome, and I am a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit ooida.com.